Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining my talk about how we can become better and more resilient technical writers in a turbulent work environment. My name is Anna. I'm the main technical writer advisor for the log management product line of One Identity by Quest. I also occasionally advise the privileged access management product line, mostly when it comes to UX and usability. I'm a member of the Quest Equality and Inclusion Council and the One Identity TechCom Guild, as well as the One Identity TechCom Style Guide Committee. I specialize in US aspects, usability and user assistance, information architecture, and inclusive language. Since March 2020, my technical writer team and I have gone through a lot, which prompted me to come up with this presentation. So, what does Alchemy have to do with this? Well, I would talk about the fun equipment in Alchemy labs, metals and whatnot. No, just kidding. This is probably cool as well. But instead, I like to talk about the spiritual aspect of alchemy, which is probably less frequently discussed. The transformation, or perhaps I could also say transmutation, during which we become better versions of ourselves. As you will see later, I find the chrysalis analogy very fitting here. So, in a nutshell, I will tell you about the challenges that my team members faced as individuals, as a team, and while we were working together with other teams in the company. I will also tell you about the conclusions, that is, the lessons we learned, and also about the tips and tricks that we use to get through these difficult times. I would like to point out here that although the challenges, conclusions, and the tips and tricks do not only apply to technical writers, we hope they will be useful for them as well. And by all means, feel free to ask any specifically technical writing related questions during the Q&A if you feel like it. So let's see where our story starts. Once upon a time, there was a technical writer team of 3 members going strong, always meeting these, release deadlines and every deadline pretty much, finishing every task on time. Sounds too good to be true? Yeah, you're right. It wasn't perfect, and we did have our issues, of course. But things were manageable and a lot less complicated and complex, honestly. And then came COVID. Well, March 2020 lockdowns and shifting to working from home didn't fully take us by surprise. We had been discussing contingency plans with our managers and upper management for months out of precaution. Also, we were super lucky, for the company responded to the situation very fast and has been showing constant support ever since. We could shift to working from home immediately, and we see genuine effort to make the situation a little easier for all of us. Still, the actual reality of this shift was something that none of us were truly prepared for. First of all, we didn't know exactly how long it would take. Weeks, months, years. Then there was inevitable fear of the unknown, for our beloved ones, job security. Also, unpredictability was hard. Regulations kept popping up practically overnight and changing very rapidly. We were doing our best to stay informed and be prepared as much as possible. The first weeks or even months were so traumatizing and exhausting in several respects that it's no wonder it didn't take long for many people to snap. But COVID doesn't care how hard it is for you or whether you snap. After weeks into the first wave, self-isolation was still going strong, and we could barely catch our breath and further waves came in. Understandably, coping with this is much harder for some than others. Although introversion or extroversion is not the only thing that affects how easily someone can adjust, most introverts had a somewhat easier time than extroverts. Mind you, this is a general observation, and there were other factors to complicate things. Well, we'll talk more about this in a minute. So in fact, let's discuss working from home first. Unless you have been a full remote worker for some time, your place is probably not necessarily suitable for working from home. Imagine if your downtown apartment, in the middle of a noisy apartment complex, is the size of a shoebox with no way of separating rooms, and your partner is also at home nonstop. Less ideal. Or perhaps the whole family is trying to work or study or just simply exist from home 24/7. Perhaps your neighbors think it's an excellent idea to start renovating the apartment directly below yours for about 5 months straight. Been there, done that. And also, most of us had to shift to juggling private lives more intensely than before. And it took us quite some time to adjust. We were stuck at home, working from home, doing homeschooling occasionally. We had shopping and housework challenges. So depending on our living conditions, our temperament, relationship or family dynamics, some of us had a harder time coping. Some of us on the team enjoy working from home, but struggled with interrupts. Some live on their own and starting missing the company of others after a while. Some are okay with working from home and even juggling, but found it hard to support their partners while they were facing difficulties at work. Because let's face it, most of us probably faced at least some of these. For example, in addition to the shifting to working from home situation and changes in organization, my team had to cope with the entire workflow moving to an online space and an increased need for communication at the same time. Also, the way we discussed our documentation tasks with developers before, which was a hybrid form of in-person and online communication, was not an option anymore, obviously. So turbulence is an understatement for this period. The number of meetings multiplied, and we were talking about global environments. So some of these meetings were arranged for way after our working hours, and attending them could be brutal, especially since as writers, speech is not necessarily our primary productive skill as opposed to, well, writing. So the amount of information we process and the workload increased as well. And no matter how good you are at processing or filtering information, too much is too much, and overload was bound to happen at some point. Often, we were too tired to comprehend meetings, found it difficult to interact with others, we had a short attention span, and constant decision fatigue. I could go on. Being driven and taking pride in your work, we did our best to make up for all of this and still deliver. It's tempting to soldier on, especially if you grew up in an environment that values self-sacrifice as a core of its work ethic. Add people who find it hard to set boundaries and keeping a healthy work-life balance, and you can see how for some of us, burnout, depression, and demotivation was just waiting around the corner. Also, due to acquisitions, the company had new products to develop and document, so we had to hire new members and fast. Now, growing your team is always challenging. Add lockdowns and take personal interviews out of the equation, and well, good luck. But we managed in the end. Still, getting there was hard. And once we did manage to hire new team members, it was time for onboarding and team building. Again, normally this is done in person, but installing our toolchain and configuring it properly takes a few days in itself. And now, due to lockdowns, we had to resort to Confluence pages and occasional online meetings to help our new team members with this. It's probably no surprise that reaching a flow state was painfully difficult at times. And this had a negative impact on the quality of our writing. I'm not going to lie. There were extremely difficult times for all of us as individuals, as a team, and probably on a cross-teams level as well. At first, we were just trying to keep afloat and cope, honestly. We weren't thinking about what there was to be learned from all this. In time, though, things settled down a little, and we looked back and reflected. So here come the conclusions, the lessons we learned. Our first conclusion is no matter what, change will happen. Well, most of us need at least some level of stability and predictability to function well, and it can be painful to have any of that suddenly taken away, let alone most of it. So the sad reality is that stability is relative, and we can only enjoy it for so long. Sad, but true. We also learned that assuming that everyone thinks like we do is not useful at all. Take my team, for example. We are very like-minded people. Most of us are introverts, so you might assume that most of us would be okay with working from home and virtual meetings as opposed to office-based work and in-person meetings. Well, nope. It was amazing to realize how different we can be. Some of us actually long for in-person meetings, working in the office, and they actually suffer from self-isolation. Unexpected much? Similarly, the way someone deals with self-isolation and working primarily from home can be very different. It can feel painfully lonely, or the ultimate Zen experience, or both, neither, somewhere in between, or alternating even. So it's no surprise that shifting back to office-based work is not something that all of us want. Yeah, we've been hearing the phrase going back to the office, or the phrase going back to normalcy more and more these days. Honestly, I find this problematic for several reasons, but more about that later. As I said before, some of us were okay with the work from home shift, but some of us are struggling. Now, the latter, understandably, they can't wait to return to the office, while those who prefer working from home, even on a daily basis, for us, the mere thought of it can be a serious stress factor. And speaking of stress, now these months have been very stressful. Work-life balance challenges, worrying about the safety of beloved ones and friends, financial issues, noisy neighbors, difficulties at work, being overworked but no chance of vacation, just to name a few. So no matter how strong you are or how efficient your coping techniques are, you can only cope with so much. Ideally, you can recognize the signs of stress overload before burnout, but life can get a lot more complicated than that. For example, keeping a healthy work-life balance can be very hard. In fact, sometimes working from home makes things much worse unless you're super self-disciplined. I know it sounds weird, but it's true. For conscientious high flyer types, the danger of tilting to work heavy is very real. Again, true story. We also found that as tech writers, prolonged stress can be extremely harmful. Maybe not so much for productivity, then again, it depends, but for creativity, most definitely. So sure, sometimes working on fast-paced projects, there was a rush of energy and creativity, and we could cooperate magically. These were the ups. And then there were downs when some of us felt like a deflated balloon and we literally couldn't put two grammatically correct sentences together. So these fluctuations were very frustrating. And of course, especially when facing tight schedules, it's frustrating. And imagine if you have to deliver quality work fast, less amusing. Okay, so enough about the challenges and lessons learned. I want to learn about the alchemy part, right? So how did all of this help us become better? Now, this is where I'd like to refer back to the caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly analogy from earlier. The caterpillar, entering the chrysalis phase, transforms entirely, breaking down and reorganizing its body structures during the process. Now, in my mind, the adversities of the pandemic situation, especially isolation and working from home, these represent the chrysalis phase. During this stage, we had the opportunity to break down and let go of what no longer works for us or serves us. And after that, we could reorganize what remained into something new, different, and preferably better. See, we found we grew wings and took flight. Now, sure, that's beautiful, but how, you ask? So here are some tips and tricks that we use to help ourselves, to help facilitate cross-teams collaboration, and to create and foster a healthier work culture. They worked really well for us, and I truly hope that you will find at least some of them useful as well. So let's begin with the individual tips and tricks. So what we can do to help ourselves become a better and more resilient version of ourselves. What are a few things that perhaps during these difficult times especially have become more timely than ever before? Well, first, you can start by establishing your good enough. Becoming a better version of ourselves doesn't necessarily mean becoming more productive, efficient, and load-bearing. In fact, the more we take on, the more exhausted we become, and the less efficient we become at work. So, like I said, for high flyers especially, the concept of good enough is very hard to accept. It goes against our grain to settle for something that, in our minds at least, is not perfect. The efficiency trap is a vicious circle, though. So it's vital that we all learn to establish our own criteria for what's good enough. We also found that rapid context switches did not help us with creativity at all, but alternating periods of routine tasks and more creative tasks can help, actually. Personally, I try to organize my tasks this way whenever I can. Asking for help can also work wonders. We can get stuck with a difficult task. We are wasting a lot of time and energy figuring things for ourselves, frustrating ourselves to a great deal in the process. So instead, sometimes it's better to just go ahead and ask someone for help when you need it. Now, prioritizing and delegating tasks may sound cliche, but they are very useful if you do not want to drown in your workload. Now, my team of tech writers insists development teams or product managers or product owners give us a priority and deadline estimate for documentation tasks right away. For anything other than internal tasks, such as clearing up our Flare code base or unifying our doc sets, we leave prioritization to product owners and product managers. And as for delegating tasks, well, I admit that I was so used to having to do literally everything for my own product line for a while that when I finally had the chance to delegate smaller tasks, I found it super hard. But still, it was worth the effort to learn to do this. Honestly, I wouldn't have been able to prepare for this conference otherwise. So whenever you can, and it makes sense as well, distribute the workload. Yeah, you probably heard this before, but it's true. Self-love and self-care is very important if we want to be able to give our best. Devotion and taking pride in our work is respectable, but we can only give of ourselves so much before there isn't anything left to give. So don't be afraid to prioritize yourself and both your physical and mental health. Sure, we have jobs to do, and we have to adjust to a certain degree, but within reason, there are a few things that you can do. For example, set boundaries when it comes to work-life balance. And if you can work flexible hours, organize them the way they work for you best. At least try. And also, when you feel that real expectations are unrealistic, talk to those involved and try to reach a more realistic middle ground. I know I'm going to sound like a fortune cookie, but yes, I know this is easier said than done sometimes. I mean, good luck finding inner peace if you are overworked, stressed all the time. You must juggle responsibilities, have financial issues, less ideal living environment, and so on and so on. So how can I still create and find this, inner peace and balance? The bad news is there is no one-size-fits-all solution, because it depends on your personality, preferences, needs, circumstances. For some people, taking walks in the woods is nice. For some, listening to music works. Some play video games or read. Some have a dedicated me time hour. Well, I, for example, as you can see, set up this Japanese room interior background pic to have something beautiful to look at. And whenever I can, I try to keep my 2 cats close by, and I take short breaks during the day, coffee or just, lunch, something like that. But that's me. So my advice is find something to soothe, ground, or relax you, or whatever makes you feel a little better, really. It really helps a lot. And even if you love your job to the point where it's almost like a hobby, it's important to take breaks sometimes. Coffee break, half a day off, long weekends, vacations. They can all refresh and recharge us. They replenish our productivity and creativity. We'll be more rested, we endure challenges much better, and probably come up with better, more creative ideas, easier and much faster. Now, working on becoming the best version of ourselves can be very hard, but improving the way that we as a team can function and improving cross-teams workflow and processes can be even harder. With more people involved, the process gets more complex. But there are a few things that you can do. For example, my team prefers being proactive and taking the lead. When it was time to rethink the way the team collaborated with development, the team sat down, we discussed what works for us, what we need to change, and so on. When we were done, we flagged the developer teams, we scheduled meetings, and we all discussed how we can work together best. We quickly got on the same page and found workable collaboration methods really fast and easy. And speaking of collaboration, my team found that the sooner we are involved in the development process, the better. When we switched to working from home, planning ahead and staying involved was, even more important. So again, we went proactive, found ways to be there and be heard as well. We had to readjust quite often, but still there was a general direction at least. So we have a more or less established workflow by now, but it's still important to insist on planning whenever possible. Which brings us to a related topic, time and wasting it. You see, this is tricky. How do you define time wasted? Well, for technical writers, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can all agree that lengthy meetings with no purpose or focus, with little to discuss, or meetings that are about something that could have been addressed in a memo or through Teams or even an email is time wasted. In addition to context switch, we lose time that we could have used for getting ahead with our tasks. And we also use a lot of our energy and mental capacity. So a few pointers. First of all, aim for clarity and brevity in communication. The less ambiguity, the better. Consider if, scheduling a virtual meeting is absolutely necessary. Well, if it's not, try to find alternatives. And if it is necessary for some reason, everyone involved should prepare, preferably with an agenda at least, with the exception of ad hoc meetings, of course. But then again, try to respect other people's schedule and plan ahead whenever possible in order to avoid these. Embracing diversity. Now, sometimes it's harder to work with people who see the world in a different way. More points of view and more factors to consider can entail more effort. Well, still, there are several benefits as well. First of all, you can work magic if you utilize team diversity well. In our team, for example, in addition to our core skills, we have someone who is exceptionally good at CSS. We have an expert at API documentation. And we also have someone who is good at UX and UA, and so on. So we can distribute our tasks according to the team members' affinity. So everyone gets to work on something that they enjoy and they can be good at. The second aspect is that inclusive collaboration methods and workflows facilitate resilience as professionals, individuals, as a team, and even as an organization. Last but not least, a culture of diversity at the workplace is good for product quality, team integrity and dynamics, and cross-teams collaboration as well. So go the extra mile and embrace diversity. There is immense strength in there. Now, I've mentioned, team building issues before. So first of all, traditional team building methods have really never really worked for my team members. Honestly, if anything, we found them deeply annoying. So, and also let's not forget that they weren't really an option due to lockdowns for a while. So we came up with alternative ways of team building and bonding instead. And in fact, these happened quite spontaneously. For example, collaboration on different and difficult projects brought us together effortlessly. The bonds that we managed to form are incomparably stronger than any organized traditional team meeting. So then there were also other ways to have fun with the teams and colleagues. We actually created dedicated fun teams channels for sharing anything, personal jokes, recipes, kitten pictures, whatever, and to share laughs, to relate, or just to blow off steam a little. Speaking of blowing off steam, it might sound weird, but we occasionally come up with ad hoc venting sessions. Sounds weird? Yeah, well, perhaps it's not everyone's cup of tea, but for my team at least, this was a lifesaver during difficult times. And so are virtual cafe meetings, actually. For me, at least, nothing really compares to an actual cafe and sitting down for a pleasant chat, especially if they serve Turkish coffee. But these days, the closest thing that we can get to this is scheduling an online meeting for the team for coffee, strictly non-shop talk. Oh, and these are always optional. There is no pressure here. So we've talked about tricks to improve as individuals and as a team, but what about creating a healthier work environment? Well, while changes can be good and they create great opportunities for something better, it's important to find a balance. Personally, too much uncertainty makes me feel like a bird that can never take off on a branch to rest. But metaphorically speaking, I love flying sometimes, but without some grounding at least, I exhaust myself sooner or later. So keep in mind that everyone needs at least some level of stability, and you can facilitate others by being reliable, supportive, and dependable. You can also show your support through accommodating teammates, colleagues, and employees. Now, during COVID, most managers had to deal with the fact that employees were facing difficulties, and different management methods became necessary. It was hard for them as well. And by all means, they tried, because to address the issues, trainings and employee feedback surveys became quite common. Now, unfortunately, they weren't always free of bias. For example, the plan continuation bias was present, and also assumptions. One of these assumptions is that apparently everyone agrees on the need to return to normalcy to the same extent. Now, first of all, this is obvious that this is not true. I mean, there are dozens of articles that you can find online about this topic. And also, assumptions can distort communication, which is, in our case, should be as transparent as possible. So as a workaround, instead of assuming that you know how others feel, listen. Go ahead, ask, and really listen. And by all means, take the feedback seriously, even if it indicates that things need to change. Personally, I think the sentence, "things will get back to normal," is problematic on several levels. First of all, we do not all think alike and consider the same things normal. Second, this is true on a larger scale. I mean, the larger the team or the department or the company even, the more likely it is that emphasizing this, need to regain normalcy will invoke mixed feelings. In my opinion, the pandemic situation has brought drastic changes. So I think it's high time that we reassess the concept of normal. Naturally, some things are best left unchanged. But instead of trying to stick to the way things were at all costs and every time, we might as well invest the same amount of energy to adopt if necessary, right? We might even find that, the new more works much better. And even if it doesn't, we can always revise and improve. And speaking of improvement and revision, trust is essential for good teamwork and a healthy work environment. Not talking about blind trust, of course, but placing confidence in others is healthy. So trust the judgment, integrity, and talent of others, and have faith in them doing their very best to achieve your shared goals. And remember, just because they will do their best, that doesn't mean they should be overburdened. As managers and employees, it's understandable to have goals, but if they are unrealistic, frustration and burnout is guaranteed. The planned continuation bias is definitely not our friend here. So recognizing that our teammates and colleagues and employees have reached their limits is of key importance. If you see the signs, reconsider your goals and expectations. And by all means, express your gratitude and appreciation. Now, really listening to others is a very good start. Showing support and placing confidence in others is a great way to continue. And showing your appreciation is the icing on the cake, so to speak. I mean, some people need less external validation to be driven, but most of us like feeling valued. So do not assume that the other person knows they're valued. Express it. It's worth the effort. So to conclude, the alchemy of spiritual transmutation is very hard work, just like it is hard work for the caterpillar to transform. Also, all these pieces of advice are a lot to keep in mind, I know. So in a nutshell, I have a following advice for a takeaway. First, be kind, patient, and forgiving. Change is hard. Most of us hate change, and dealing with this is tough. And everyone who keeps up the good work is praiseworthy. Second, remember that you do not have to do everything on your own. Wherever cooperation makes more sense, work together. And finally, some things that you do won't get right at first attempt. And this is okay, as long as you learn from it and keep improving. So to all of you out there, go you, keep on keeping on. Now, thank you for your attention. And as a closing note, allow me to express my thanks to my TechCom team and the developer teams I work with. I would also like to thank the company's management teams, the Equality and Inclusion Council, the TechCom Guild, and the Steigerite Committee. You all have learned, helped me learn a lot and helped me through difficult times. So I appreciate everything, literally everything. Also, I would like to give credits to Crello.com, Pixaday.com, and Unsplash.com for the illustrations I used. I hope you enjoyed them. So I'll be seeing you in the Q&A session. Ask away. Bye.
Yeah, so perhaps we will dive into some of the questions, including the one that you mentioned from, I think it's Chen or Ken.
Chen. Yeah, I'm butchering.
Well, we have people from everywhere in this community,
Yes.
no worries. So Chen had asked about creating psychologically safe spaces, and I read that question as having to do with building trust with your colleagues. And you had given some tips about having ad hoc venting sessions or coffee chats. But for example, what if you don't quite feel safe venting to your coworkers?
Yeah, the way I see it, there are two problems here. First of all, you need a trusting and supporting environment. So that's one thing that you need to have. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. And the other thing is you need to be able to read the atmosphere, so to speak. So if you can read the others on the team and the colleagues and the work environment successfully, then you can just, guess if it's all right to open up, if that's something that you might be worried about, and that would be understandable. So what I can encourage is lead by example. So be supportive. Definitely, show others that you are there for them, that you are supportive again. And my other advice would be speak up if you see someone being abusive, if that's the way to put it, because some work environments can be abusive in this respect and non-inclusive. So if you feel that it's not safe to speak out, maybe flag HR about it. So I guess that could be a way to go. And I hope that answers your question.
I would guess it's not a science. It takes time. Perhaps
Yeah.
if you do have at least one person you trust, to start with them and then get their feedback and go from there.
Yeah.
But yeah. Let me look at some of the other questions we have from Maria and Jiri. Maria had asked if you had any tips for those of us struggling to go back to the office, in quotes, and interact with people.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that this question came up. So, first of all, I really hope that you all have good relationships with your managers and colleagues. Um, I would definitely encourage everyone to express the anxiety regarding this and be very upfront about it, and I would say precise and outspoken. I realize this is probably easier said than done, but if you can, then by all means do it. It's like I refer back to my slides. Don't assume that other people will understand, explain, clarify, and spell it out, basically. To your colleagues as well, and your managers as well. And I can, give a personal example. I'm very, very vocal about my reluctance to return to the office full time because I'm just not cut out for it. Because I know myself. I function best working from home primarily. And also, I clarify why I might be acting weird because I'm neurodiverse as well. So they understand better that when I keep my distance, then doesn't mean I hate them. It means that that's how I work, and then I have my anxieties. So that's my advice. Hope it helps.
Awesome. Jiri's question about any tips you might have for documentation outings when teams are very diverse and when traditional team building events are not an option.
Yeah, I know it's hard. Actually, I've seen a lot of good suggestions in the chat. So I suggest you look into those because those are probably a lot better than what I can suggest, because all I can suggest is hikes or outings or anything that's outdoors activity. My team is still trying to find a good solution for this, because most of us, some of us live in the capital city, and then others live in, the residential areas around, so the perimeter.